Hi, this is PatZi with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And boy, do I have a story for you today. It is amazing. Here are the two books that were part of the conversation, but the new book is called Red Star Falling, and it's by Steve Berry and Grant Blackwood. And this is book two in what is going to be a trilogy, I understand, although maybe by popular demand it'll be more because there's going to be popular demand. I knew after The Ninth Man, when that came out, I said to myself, oh, this is a great series. So I am so happy to welcome both Steve and Grant to Joy on Paper Live. This is so exciting because now I get to see you guys. We've talked in the past. Well, of course, Steve was on a while back on the live program, one of my first guests. And whoa, things have been really moving fast here on Joy on Paper Live. So I'm so excited to have you guys here. Oh, Red Star Falling is amazing. It's such a great book. When we talk about action and we talk about drama, we've got it all here. Now, which one of you wants to start with the prologue? Who wants to go into that? Because that is one of the best prologues I've ever read. For a moment there, I had like almost sympathy.
I guess I'll
Well,
do
let's
it.
see.
Okay.
That was one of my contributions to the manuscript. I wanted Ivan the Terrible in the book. He needed to be in there. We needed to lay the groundwork for the library, and we needed to set the tone for it. I used an actual execution that occurred back in Russia during that time. I came across it years ago when I was researching the Romanov prophecy. And so when we wrote this book, I dug out that and created that scene that you read there.
Well, it is dramatic. Now, who is going to talk about Russia today? We're going to be talking a lot about Russia. And one of the things I think people will find interesting is that we're talking about communism or not communism. For Americans, I think they get confused that current Russia is not communist. And when you think about it, Lenin died in 1924.
I'll let Grant take that one.
Yeah, currently Russia is certainly not communist, but I think it certainly slid arguably back into an authoritarian regime. People can argue this, but I certainly don't think they have the kind of freedom they did when the wall first came down. I don't think communism is coming back because capitalism is just too lucrative for too many people. But there is no doubt that Putin and our president of Russia in the book, Konstantin Franco, are authoritarians heading toward dictatorship.
After we have this amazing prologue, so we get introduced to Ivan, who, of course, we think of as Ivan the Terrible. There's a lot of backstory that goes with this, which is carried through the book. There are so many great things about the first chapter. I love when first chapter just takes off. And one of the things I loved, we have Luke Daniels. And Luke Daniels is just such a great character. When you developed him, I thought, this is just perfect. And when he realizes that somebody's following him, and when he says, you want to play? I just thought, like, as the reader, when you get to Luke Daniels say, you want to play? I think reading this book, they say, yeah, we want to play, Luke. Start the story. Because we know we're going to have a lot of excitement along the way.
Now, this book is a lot of action adventure, and that's the way we wanted the Luke Daniels books. The Malone books are heavy with history. The first Luke Daniels book was heavy with history, but I always wanted them to be a little more action adventure, a little less history, a little more action adventure. And I think we made that leap here and there. You have the history, you have all the things there, but it is an action adventure story. Takes Luke across Russia on a very perilous journey. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of way, but along the way, who gets the job done.
And it takes the readers on a wonderful journey. So let's tell a little backstory about Luke and about Magellan. Grant, why don't you do that and tell us about the Magellan billet and tell us where Luke fits into the picture.
Magellan billet is Steve's creation. It's a Department of Justice intelligence organization, and it started with Cotton Malone, and Cotton Malone had been leading the charge from Magellan Billet from the very start. Luke was introduced on Lincoln Myth, I believe. Steve will correct me if I got that wrong. And he came in from being an Army Ranger who had been deployed, and he knew combat very well. So he was a good addition to the team, but he was young, headstrong, and he needed some, I think, seasoning and some tutelage from Cotton Pappy Malone, which is what Luke occasionally calls him. But Luke has grown through these books. He's tempered his Army Ranger tendencies with a good intelligence officer that Magellan Billet needs.
It's wonderful how he's developed over the time.
That's the whole idea. We wanted him to grow. He started out as very young, very impetuous, made a lot of mistakes, but we want him to get a little better and a little better. And in this case, he's teamed up with a woman who's a Russian operative who is very much like he was in the beginning back in Lincoln Myth. So the role's reversed now, where Luke becomes the old crow and has to lead her through her mistakes.
From the first chapter, Luke discovers that an old friend might be alive. And from there, we're headed off into this adventure. Now, one of the nice things about the book, I love that you take us around Russia. It's really like a travel log.
Yeah, that was done intentionally. We wanted to go to some places in Russia that the reader may never have been to before. And I'll let Grant speak about that because he chose a lot of those locations.
I chose, I think, Hungary when we started out, and Steve and I agreed that we wanted to set it a little bit outside of Russia because the whole operation that Luke is going into, and Luke and John Vince started years earlier, is on the boundary of a Russian-Ukraine war, which we keep fuzzy because things are so fluid over there. But once Luke gets into Russia, it is a travel log interspersed with Luke getting in a lot of trouble. Russia is mind-bogglingly vast, and a lot of it is rural. And there's deep connections with the history of Russia and Soviet Union. So we tried to play on that, and there were some locations that neither Steve or I heard of until we researched them. I think the readers are going to find it fascinating and exciting what Luke gets himself into.
It did, to the point that at one point I said, I'd like to go back there. I lasted in Russia for 2 days. I was in Moscow for 2 days, 2.5 days. And then I had to get out there with some kind of something going on. So I had planned to actually recreate Anna Karenina and go to St. Petersburg and do that whole thing. But I had to do a real quick turnaround. It was a bad time to be in Russia when I happened to land there. But both of you have been there, so you know the atmosphere and the people.
We have. I've been there twice. I think Grant's been there once.
For you, Steve, you said you contributed to the prologue and about Ivan, and tell us a little bit about the story about his book.
That's the interesting thing about the Lost Library of Ivan the Terrible. We don't know exactly what was in the library. We know what some people have said was in the library, and some people who supposedly saw it the 1500s. There were first editions and original editions of manuscripts that today we do not have any longer. We only have bits and pieces of those manuscripts. What else was in there, we don't know. There's no complete inventory, and that's what makes it fun for me, because then we can use it however we please. And we can put whatever we want to into that library. And I've been wanting to work the library into a Cotton Malone book for years, but never was able to. And Grant found a way to integrate it here and make it work. And it worked out very well.
Well, it does, because I don't want to go search for it. I want to find it.
Yeah, no, nobody knows where it is. That's the interesting thing. It hasn't been seen in 500 years.
Wow. Your ability to grab onto a point in history and just bring it alive is always so much fun. So
that's what we do, and that's our thing. We like to do action, history, secrets, conspiracies, merge them together, and make a story that entertains and keeps the reader engaged. And it's a challenge, but we give it our best shot.
I think you do. And you have a whole, as you said, you have interesting characters that you've brought in some new characters and some of our old characters we've loved before. So that's always fun to see how you bring in the new characters and introduce them into the storyline.
That's what we work for as hard as we can. We try to get it right. It's hard sometimes, but we try.
Now, of course, and you also give depth to your characters, like somebody who, like a 1967 Mustang. Does one of you have a 1967 Mustang?
No, I never had one, but I've seen a lot of them. But it seemed like the perfect car that Luke Daniels would drive.
It does. None of you guys can go out and buy one because that would be nice.
Grant needs one. He needs a convertible.
You know, it's just a little too racy for me. I'm more conservative as I get older.
You know, you see, Grant, you need it because it would be tax deductible because it's needed for your publicity shot. You can both use it for publicity shot. So,
And speaking of that, the last interview we did, he had this really scruffy beard. I see that he shaved.
Ah.
Yeah, he shaved up now. He had a real scruffy beard all over the place. I never seen him with a beard before, but it's all clean.
No,
shaven.
my wife informed me that I looked a little disheveled, so I shaved.
so
It was a Grizzly Adams look a little bit there. It was.
That's right. Yeah.
I love when you mention things, and I know that they probably are like a dream car or maybe something that you enjoy, like Louis L'Amour. You mentioned Louis L'Amour. Which one of you contributed?
That was Grant.
That's right. Yeah, Louis L'Amour, he writes Westerns, and I love Westerns, him especially, but he is so concise, and he gets so much out of a story that whenever I can reference him or other authors who do that well, I like to slip that in.
I found it amusing because I'm actually going to be interviewing his son, both whom I don't know if you've read the book that he took with his father's book and helped to finish it up, and it's called No Traveler's Return. So I'm going to be interviewing him. And of course, you named some your characters. How many are your wife's names mentioned in the stories? Have you named them in any of the characters?
I think in the last book we didn't mention Julie's name, but we mentioned something in the refrigerator, did we?
Yes, we did. Yes. I think we mentioned something for my wife. She's not a fan of herring. I think there was some herring in the fridge, and that was even I taking a little shot at Julie disdain for herring.
Oh, well, that's too bad. I love herring.
This book is very interesting because it deals with a legend, basically. A legend that the Soviets supposedly orbited a nuclear weapon towards the end of the 1980s into the 1990s. No one knows if that's true or false. We really don't know the answer to that. But I had read about this quite a bit, and it just got me thinking, what would happen if they'd actually done it? But when the reader thinks that they're reading a book about a weapon up there and it's going to fall on Washington or Paris, it's going to be a terrorist, it's going to do that. And that's not what this is about. This nuclear weapon has a twist, has a very interesting twist, and we can't tell that gives away part of the book. But there is a surprising twist to the weapon that will catch the reader off guard.
They will all want to know what Red Star Falling means.
They'll know then. They'll know what it means then.
As you mentioned in the book, the current leader is an autocrat. Wants to, I don't know, take over the world. I think it's similar to somebody we read about in the news a lot. But tell us a little bit, the former, what is he, prime minister? Not what was he called?
He would be the premier. You take that, Grant.
Talking about Constantine Franco or the man that preceded him, the other big wig we talk about?
Yeah.
I think she means Franco.
You know, Franco is, I don't think it's going to be any surprise. He's somewhat modeled on the current leader in the world. This is a person who believes in the idea of a greater Russia, and expansionism is part of his mandate. I don't think he comes out and says it, but I think that's what he's after. He's an autocrat and authoritarian. He thinks that the Soviet Union was the greatest time of his country, and he wants to slip back there. maybe not with communism, but just in the way it was perceived by the world. Konstantin Franco in this book has gone so far as to reopen the Gulag system and kind of reconstitute it. So he's very much kind of a knockoff of Stalin, but in modern times.
Explain the Gulag system, because for people who don't know, it's pretty horrendous.
They were all, for all intents and purposes, they were death kings. You either died from exposure or disease or violence, or you were just worked to death. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of Soviet citizens who went there from political crimes to simply disagreeing with the regime, and they were spread throughout Russia from east to west. The Gulag, the new Gulag that we talk about, it is in a very remote location on the White Sea. I think the readers are going to be really surprised that this specific location presents a deep history with the Soviet Gulag system. We tie those things together.
Now, Steve, did you go to see Lenin?
Yes, I've been to Lenin's too. Yes, I've been to Moscow. I've been to St. Petersburg. So I did see all of that myself, yes.
Can you believe that they're still saving it?
It is amazing, isn't it, that they still expend all that time and energy and all to a guy who was basically just a mass murderer, what he was.
They used to have these long lines of people.
Yeah, it's a very surreal thing to go see it because it's totally quiet. There's no talking. You parade in, you go through in this line. It's quite a surreal experience. And why they keep doing it, I have no idea. They put the man in it.
I went to Moscow, but I was on a very tight timeline, a research trip for a book. Spent a few days there between interviews with some former KGB people. I got around a little bit, but not as much as I would like.
And Steve, explain, people have heard of the Kremlin. Explain to people where that word comes from.
It means citadel, it's fortress. And it was the center of Moscow in its early days and into medieval times. And it was heavily fortified with walls. It was like we would call a castle. And they would fortify it, and inside are a variety of buildings, all kinds of things in there. The cathedral's there. That's where the center of government is. The communists used that as their meeting area and their meeting grounds. There's a state assembly hall in there. It's a very large place. Interesting. There's a museum there as well. And I was able to go through and tour the whole thing.
And did you tour the Lubyanka?
No, I didn't go there. When I was there in 95, that building was still in operation. Then I went back in 2009. And I didn't go in there.
It's just as well. I don't think you really want to get in there.
I actually did see it in 2006.
Oh, you did?
Part of it is a museum, but you get to see some of the actual parts of the prison where inmates were kept, and you get out of it and you're very happy to see the sun again. It has that aura to it.
Strange places to visit. That, Lubyanka, and visiting Lenin crumbling body. It's one of the best tourist attractions that I can think of.
What's what writers do? We end up in things like that. That's what we want to see.
Oh, yeah, you have to see it. Absolutely. Things they preserve. I don't know. When you traveled around Russia, how did you find the people? What was the attitude towards Americans?
In 95, they were still very cautious, and it was a very closed off area. So it was not the best in the world, though the folks I interacted with were all very nice. In 2009, everybody was lovely. There's no problem. I think a lot's changed since then, but when I went in 95, the wall had just come down a few years. The Soviet Union had just fallen about 4 years before. The whole place was still in a state of flux. So everyone was very cautious and careful with what they said and did.
Grant, when you were writing the book, and people always wonder how you two write together, because you write or you just, it all blends in. And if one of you writes a great sentence, then I would say to the other one, good job.
From the very start, he outlined the way it was going to work, and I was going to give him the best draft I could of how I envisioned the story and how he worked it out. But he gave me a lot of leeway to go where I want and do what I want. and then I give him the draft, and he puts his Steve Berry stamp on it to make sure it will be the best product for his audience. And so that was how we started, and I think it works really well.
And which one of you does the details about weapons?
That's him. That's him. He does it.
The thing is, I do that, and I enjoy it, and I've had a lot of experience in it. Steve has a better touch for action than he thinks he does, and he has a beautiful touch for history, of course. But the thing about all the action, like in The Ninth Man, when we were writing it, there were a lot of times where he would say, "You got to back off. Luke can't be shooting all these people. You got to tone it down." And that was part of Luke's growth arc, I think, is he went from a guy who action solves all problems to a guy that is more patient, circumspect about things.
When he uses that phrase, "you want to play," the reader is ready for Luke to play.
And he plays. He knows what he's doing. But I like that in my books, I don't like to have a lot of violence. We have to have some violence, but we don't want to go crazy with it. And I have to be a little more careful with it. Grant was a little more used to a little looser on the violence, but we had to tone that down a little bit.
And I like the little details. I love the history. For me,
As I said, the story only requires us finding one goal, and that's what we're after.
that's what you're after. That's what you're after. And you always have these little details that give the book this extra depth. All of these little details. I love those.
That's Mr. Blackwood takes that. That's his job. That's what he puts in.
There are a lot of times and Steve will probably agree, we do so much research that the temptation is to put everything you find of interest in a book. And one of the challenges is picking and choosing what the reader will find interesting versus what you find interesting. And I think between the two of us, we find a really good balance with that.
Thinking of Louis L'Amour, the stories goes that his daughter one time asked him, "Why are you typing so fast?" He was typing like crazy. And she interrupted him, and he looked up and he said, "Because I want to know how the story is going to end." And of course, his books are known, just like yours, really adventure, excitement. And you captured that in this book and with, of course, Ninth Man.
That was our goal. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to get it a little more action adventure. We're working on the third book now, and it'll be coming out down the road. And it's going to be an interesting story. Luke will be involved again, and you'll be dealing with something that involves Walt Disney.
That's intriguing. Now you've got us really thinking. Now we're gonna have to wait
Another year or so.
another year or so. I think it's fantastic. You've done a wonderful job with this book. Red Star Falling. Everybody will really enjoy it. A really great read. And when the two of you are working together, and you said you go back and forth, but thinking about Louis L'Amour again, do you know the ending for sure when you start, or are you still surprised at some point? You get to a point where you say, "This is working really well. This section's working really well. Maybe we can twist it and go this away and that away."
No, we have a general idea what the ending will be before we start, because you have to. Because you start a book as close to the end as possible. So you need to know what the end is to get as close to it as you can. So we had a pretty good idea how this book is going to end up. Though I will say there are two twists in the novel that occurred to us during the writing. Those were not there when we started. If any reader says, "I saw that coming," I don't see how, because we didn't see it coming till we got there. And we don't foreshadow it. We don't give you any warning or anything. So there are two things that affected the ending dramatically. Yes.
As you get your dynamics between the characters and how they interrelate with each other, that can change things.
That changes as you go along, but we try to bring them to the conclusion we want. But in this case, we came up with two things that occurred to us while we were writing the book. And so we worked it in there. It made for a very interesting twist that makes the reader going, "Whoa, I didn't see that coming."
I love it. That's exactly why this book, it reads so well. It's one of these books you really don't want to put down. I started like early in the morning, and I think I was still going way into the afternoon. I didn't want to stop. It's that exciting.
That's the idea.
That's what we want.
And you certainly have. I want to thank you both for being on Joy on Paper Live today. It's always great to talk to you. And let's just talk for a minute so you can just tell people your website. Both of you, I'll go to Steve first.
Yeah, my site is steveberry.org, O-R-G. Everything's there. You can find out about this book, all the Cotton Malone books, and all the other books. Everything's there.
It's a great website. And
I'm grantblackwood.com. Same thing as Steve. You can find both The Ninth Man and Red Star Falling there and other books as well.
thank you both so much for being on Joy on Paper Live today. It's really a thrill to talk to you. And congratulations on. And it's going to be a big hit. Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Bye-bye.